I moved my belt sander to a lower bench, and to lift it up so that I can work at it more comfortably, I made this parallelogram mechanism. And you might say, well, why did you do that? You're just creating work for yourself. But I have my reasons for making the bench low. It's going to have two other tools on there, and they'll be at the correct height when they're sitting on that bench. And even though this mechanism used in this application, for lifting up my sander, doesn't require the level of precision you'll get from a CNC, I've been looking for CNC projects to get in some practice so I'll get better at using it. So I'm going to make the arms for the lift here. I'm cutting these from a scrap of Baltic birch plywood, and in fact the entire project is made from scrap wood. Here I'm pulling out a scrap of maple. This is actually the bar from a prototype clamp that I made a few years ago, and I'll be able to get the 4 pieces that I need to make the rails from this. I need to drill holes in these that will be the pivot points, and the more accurately I drill those, the better the mechanism will work. So I'm using my handy table saw marking gauge to do that, at least to get the center lines, and then I can measure over with the tape. With those marked, I can drill the 3/8" holes through one, and then I'll use that to guide the holes that I'll drill through the second one so that they'll be exactly the same. Then I can glue in the 3/8" dowels that will be the pivots and wipe off the excess glue. And while the glue is drying, I can slightly chamfer the edges of the arms on my router table and use my table saw marking gauge again to lay out a line for the plywood cross members that will link these arms together. Always a good idea to do a little bit of sanding before you glue, especially on plywood that's been sitting around for a long time. The glue will stick a lot better. Then I can start gluing on the cross members by doing one side and putting something that's heavy on top. And when that's dry enough to handle, I can add screws to reinforce the joint and do the exact same on the other side. With that done, I can put the rails on and try out the mechanism for the first time. And this looks pretty good. And I can bring it over to the low bench and get it fastened in place by screwing the lower rails to the bench itself in the right location. and then bring the sander over, set it on top, and screw that onto the upper rails. And here you can see how it works. Now, you're probably asking, well, what locks this in place? And actually, nothing does. It's hyperextended, so you have to lift it up slightly before you can fold it down. And because you're pushing down on the stock, that keeps it from collapsing while you're using it. Next to the belt sander, I have the spindle sander that I rebuilt. And I need to do something similar with that, except, like I mentioned earlier, it's already at the right height, so all I need to do is make it so that it pulls out a little bit further into the room to give me a little bit more space behind. Just like the one that I just finished, this will all be made from scrap wood, and I found enough to use, but there's quite a variety here, so I'm going to cut them to length first before I bring them to the table saw and cut them down to size. And I was experimenting with a new wooden full extension drawer slide, and I thought that this would be the perfect thing to try it out on. There are two types of parts that I need. The first are the rails. They're bigger and they have a dado cut down the middle. And then I need slides that are smaller that'll actually fit in that groove that I cut in the rails. And to cut that groove, I've changed out my blade for a dado stack, and I'm going to run the pieces through in a few passes. With the dado cut, I can check it with the slide to see how that fits. It needs to move back and forth freely with a little bit of play, and this is too tight, so I'm just going to run it through again, taking a very small amount off. Next, I need to cut the dovetail slots in the slides. That's a bit of a tongue twister, and that might seem like it's something that you can do on a router table, but the sides of this dovetail are sloped at 30 degrees, so that would be a very unusual dovetail bit, one that I certainly don't have, and I don't think I've ever seen one. So instead, I'm going to do it on a table saw by tilting the blade to 30 degrees, and that 30 degrees matches the countersink on a flathead screw. Before I change the angle on the table saw back, I'm going to cut a strip that's angled on both sides, and this will make the fillers that'll fit in the ends of the dovetails that act as a stop for the screw that I'll put in later. Next, I need to do some layout on the rails for that screw, and I want to position this so that it stops the slide halfway along the length. And then when I have that figured out, I can drill the hole through the slide itself and use that as a template to drill the holes in all four rails. These are 3/4 inch number 8 screws, and the tip is really pointy and just a little bit too long for these rails. So I'm going to snip that off with my pliers and then drive in the screw and check the action. The slide should move freely and stop at the middle. And the way that the head of the screw fits in the slot also stops the slide from coming out of the groove. This counterbore that I'm drilling here is to make it so that you can take the slide apart after it's been installed without removing the screw. Last thing to do before I install this is to bring it out back and spray on a couple of coats of water-based polyurethane. This seals it up, and it also makes the slide work smoother. Then it's just a matter of screwing the inner rails to the bench and the sander to the outer rails, and it's ready to go. And I also have the cross member on the back to keep the rails together, and also gives me a place to fasten the cord. I would say that most of the time I'll be using this sander with it fully pushed in. It's only really when I need the extra space on the back that I'll be pulling it out. I figured while I was doing this, I should make an improvement to the dust collection. This is just a simple rectangular box screwed on the back. And just like the lift for the belt sander, I didn't see any need to make this locking in any way. There's enough friction built into this slide system that it really doesn't move that easily when you're using it.